Hey guys, welcome back to Battle Ready Inc. So again, BT12 getting ever closer. So I thought, you know what, we'll go ahead and just a stab at it of what I think the meta might be like for BT12. I know we've still got Ultimate Cups and things like that. That's what a lot of other channels are covering. Ultimate Cup is essentially 1 week out of like this whole time frame, and I think that the longevity of content will be better spent for BT12. BT11 has been here for quite a bit. We've had a ban list, which will also affect things, but I don't want to make a tier list for the 3 weeks that we'll have this ban list for BT11. I want to go ahead and just jump into BT12 on this tier list and just kind of see where we're going to fall and see what I think might play out. Don't forget, though, this month's featured memory marker is Busomon. So if you're a Ghost Game fan and Goromon fan, this is going to be a really great one to pick up. Really nice texture on him. Super cute. This is handmade out of clay by my wife, Digimiyu. Hand painted by her as well. Just a great end to our trifecta of Ghost Game memory markers. So if you haven't got any of them, you can also check out her Etsy page, link in the description below, and you can get the entire set all in one single purchase for a little bit of a discounted rate, as well as all of her other memory markers that she's made in the past. You can find there as well. All right, so I've got my tier list made and pulled up for you here. I hope I didn't forget anything this time around. I think the last time I made one of these, I left off Blue Flare on accident, and wow, did you guys come unleashed on me in the comments. Hopefully I didn't miss anything, but if there is a deck that I don't cover here that you are curious about, please put it in the comments and ask me just what I think, and I'll go ahead and give you my honest answer of where I think that deck would fall. All right, and so as always, we've got our S tier, which is this is kind of like your pseudo like unbeatable decks, right? These are the ones that if you play this, nothing else in these other categories can beat you. I hate formats with S tier decks. I don't like putting decks in an S tier deck. I'd rather have a format of like 10 different A tiers and no S tiers, and so that way all these decks can beat each other. So hopefully that's where we will fall for today's video. We'll just kind of have to see. I don't have this pre-planned out or anything like that, so we'll just kind of go through it off the cuff and see where we fall. A tier, of course, is like extremely good decks. You know, they can all beat each other, but also A tier is that class of, yes, these are strong and can win most of the time, but they still lose to other decks on this tier list that are below them. Okay, S tier is that class that basically nothing can beat them, even A tier and below. And then Rogue is this like just, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's this Rogue tier of like just comes out of nowhere and can steal wins from the A tiers, like a really good pilot that will take a Rogue class deck and make it win and make it, you know, able to beat out these A tier decks. All right, and then everything else, B and C, this is where it starts to get a little bit more casual and fun locals kind of style decks, and can't really compete in high level play, I would say. That's what these two slots are dedicated to. All right, so starting off, we'll just go in order here. First up, we got Bloom, and I think Bloom has definitely shown that it is definitely an A tier, probably one of the best green decks you can play. Now, again, this isn't in like an Ultimate Cup format or anything like this. This is just a pure BT12, just the Bandai restriction list. So full power here, competing against other full power decks. It's just a really fantastic deck, and it's just going to continue to get more and more support that really just make it pop off, gaining tons of memory. It's going to get a new tamer here that it can use very soon. So it's just a fantastic deck that I think is going to stick around for the foreseeable future. So if you're on the fence about investing in this deck, afraid it's going to fall off, don't worry. It's going to stick around for a good bit. Very nice, just like can control your opponent's Digimon by suspending them and swinging over and piercing. Gets tons of checks, so it can actually compete with like OTK style decks. It's got, you know, it's very quick, which is pretty important. As long as its consistency is there, as long as it sees its, you know, pieces like Bloom or Hydramon, things like that, it's got to see those pieces. As long as it does, no problem. This deck can hang with anybody. Moving on from there, we got Jessamon. And I think Jessamon is definitely one of those that, in the right hands of a very skilled player that has really stuck with this deck, it can perform well. I don't want to put it in rogue tier, but I think maybe bottom of A tier feels pretty good. It's going to get more support in the future. I think it's a pretty strong deck. It just has struggled recently against like some of these other decks that we're seeing in the format. Any deck that likes to hide in raising area, it struggles against, but besides that, it's does well. So we'll just have to wait and see how that works out. All right, next up, we've got Bielstarmon, and Bielstar, you know, it did pretty decently at Nats. You know, shout out to Primitive Kage. He did great with this. He made top cut day 2 with this. I think it's a solid deck. I actually won the Bielzamon Cup at our locals with this deck because I think it's really great. It can be fast when you need it to be fast, assuming there's no opposition that will slow you down. You know, you can get pretty wide with it if you need it, and then crash everything and go, you know, slim again, so that way you can dodge like Death X and things like that. And it's got, you know, a nice little pseudo security control vibe to it with, you know, lots of removal options, you know, stuff that can hit in security, as well as, you know, playing them for good board control as well. Where it's going to start falling off, though, and when we'll get into this as we go here, is it's no longer an A tier deck. I think it's definitely rogue tier now, and that is simply because these new decks that we're going to start seeing here that's out of BT12 trashes security without checking them. And when that happens, these kind of pseudo security control decks or actual security control decks fall off, because then they're not getting those free options triggering in security, and that's going to hurt them tremendously. So I think Bielstar is definitely going to fall down here into rogue tier, just because it can no longer rely on options getting hit in security to save it. It has to just rely on its actual turn and what it's doing to win. And I think that can hold it back a little bit, but still keep it. It's still got potential, right? I'm definitely not going to drop it below rogue tier. Like I said, anything that's in the hands of a very skilled player that knows a deck inside and out and knows the competition inside and out can take a rogue deck and then beat up any of these A tier decks. All right, moving on from there, we got Commandramon. And I think Commandramon's also just kind of falling in this rogue tier category. It's very quick. It's very simple. It really doesn't ever brick, but it can have hard counters. And I think anytime a deck has a hard counter, it's going to be in a bad position. You just have a couple like blockers against this deck, especially something like a Magnamon X, and the deck just hard loses. It cannot handle that, aside from like using Ultimate Flare and praying, you know, that they can't just stick another one immediately afterwards. So it can hard lose in certain matchups, but I think it's still a solid deck. You either win fast or you lose fast. That's very much, it's a Rookie Rush style deck. And that's I think where it's going to fall is, you know, in the right situations, it can crush some of these decks, but it can't crush them all. Okay. So I think it's going to fall right here into rogue tier. It's got good potential, but not quite where it needs to be. Next, we got Gallantmon, and if you've been looking and following along with our BT12 coverage, Gallantmon has gotten a ton of support in BT12, so much so that I actually think it's going to fall somewhere up here into A tier, probably above. Oh goodness, I've already forgotten who we were talking about. Jessamon there. Because, okay, so it's got fantastic board control, which we've seen before, okay? That's kind of been its shtick, is that, you know, you delete certain DP and lower, and it's got ways to increase the DP threshold, so, you know, you can play like a Crimson Blaze and clear your opponent's whole field of like 11,000 DP or less. Digimon, bonkers, absolutely bonkers plays that you can do like that, but it's never really had the damage output, right? And it's always struggled in that kind of category. Like Crimson Mode's really good. If you can stick Crimson Mode, usually people can win off of Crimson Mode, you know, swing, blitz, and then Evo into this guy, you know, all that shenanigans, clear your opponent's like last 1 or 2 security, and then immediately win. And that's kind of where it's relied before. But getting to that point has always been kind of tricky. But now we're getting more support that allows it to trash even more security. So we've got the new Gallantmon that can do it. We've got, you know, the Gallantmon X, and we got Crimson Mode. So just like I was talking about earlier with Bielstar, there's so many decks now that are coming out in this set that are trashing security without actually needing to check security, and that's huge. So like a lot of these decks that didn't have protection, option protection, so they really suffered in the security control matchup. And security control often being the great equalizer of formats. All these new decks are like, yeah, okay, I don't care about your security control anymore. I'm just going to trash your security and not actually have to worry about it. And so now Gallantmon is in that position where it can have great board control and it can get great damage output at the same time. Tons of new support. You know, it's got its own memory fixer now in the new Tocado. It's got, you know, a whole new Evo line that it can use. So yeah, great stuff here. Can play Tocados for free with that Growlmon, which is exactly what it needed. Wasting a turn playing a Tamer has always held Gallantmon back, but now that I can play a Tocado for free on Evo with my Growlmon, that's huge. Absolutely huge. So really like it. Moving on there. Next, we got Grandis here. And Grandis is still the same. It's just doing its thing. No issues. And honestly, I think it's still one of the best decks in the entire game. It didn't get hit on the ban list at all, so it's still doing its full power thing. Of course, in Ultimate Cup, it lost Grand, but, you know, that's an Ultimate Cup. That's literally a 1-week event, 2 weekends in a row that it lost out on power. But for, like, you know, all the regionals and the important tournaments that are out there, it's still at full power. So there's nothing to worry about there. And also with these new decks trashing the security control might be played less now, which means Grandis has less opposition to worry about. Literally the only decks that Grandis ever worried about were security control. Hitting a Chaos Degradation was huge for Grandis, and so now we'll probably see less of those decks being played, which means Grandis will be in a fantastic position moving forward. So definitely up here in the top of A tier. All right, and speaking of security control, we might as well go ahead and talk about security control. So yeah, we use the Magna Angemon because it's pretty much been the I don't know, the mascot of security control. Just hard play, recovery 1. Pretty predominant deck. Normally I would definitely put it somewhere in A tier. Now we're in that position where security control is definitely going to start suffering a good amount, and I don't think that security control can actually hang in A tier as much. It could hang possibly in A tier below any deck that's trashing its security for free, but because I feel like a lot of these decks are going to be played this format, I don't even think you can realistically put it in A tier. I think I'm actually going to, maybe for the first time ever, I can't remember, but I think we might be putting security control down here in Rogue. Definitely in the top, because it's going to blow out any of these other Rogue tier decks. For sure, it can punch into A tier very easily depending on the matchup it's against, and depending on the build that they go with. It can definitely crush a ton of A tier decks, but not going to be able to crush all of them anymore. Next, we got the Dorbeckmon deck. This is the Dorbeck Rush deck that's pretty popular right now. And depending on the format, of course, I think it's definitely going to be, you know, still just as good. It's very fast. Again, you don't have to worry about security control or anything like that this coming format as much. So it's going to be in a pretty good position. I don't know if I want to put it towards the bottom of A tier or somewhere in Rogue tier. I think it's probably somewhere in Rogue tier. Because it's just one of those decks that it's like a one-trick pony, right? You either can absolutely get the nuts and then just do crazy awesome things with it, or you're just sitting there with half your deck in hand of all bricks. So it's just one of those, it's like you either have it or you don't, and if you don't, you just can't win. And so I think it's going to fall somewhere in Rogue tier. It's a very high roll deck. And high roll, if you're not familiar, it's like if you have it, it's exactly what I just said. If you have it, you have it. Basically, if you have your pieces, you're probably not going to lose. If you don't have your pieces, you're probably going to lose. So that's, yeah, very, very RNG kind of deck here. Got great potential, but not always going to happen. Next, we got Examon here, which is similar line of thinking there. It's definitely strong. I've seen it just be an absolute menace, but then I've also seen it just completely fizzle out. If it bricks horrendously. or if it goes against the wrong matchup, it can struggle a lot. Just certain matchups can really just blow it out of the water. It can evade, sure, it's got blocker and evade, but it can only do that so much. And depending on the deck you're going against, that can be a real struggle. I think, like Bloom and Grandis, like they don't care about that. They're going to have more DP and they're just going to swing over and pierce whatever it is you try to do to stop it. You're going to force them to attack with something. Okay, they're just going to attack with their big bodies and just crush you into oblivion. So I think it's kind of the same situation there as those. I'll probably put it down here into rogue tier, just because a lot of these newer decks are going to be so strong that it's just going to be hard for Examon to deal with some of these decks coming ahead here. So probably still put it down in here somewhere into rogue, just up here at the top of rogue for sure. Next, we got the Shoutmon deck. This is, I believe, the Cross 7 is what we went with. It's got Superior Mode coming out. It's got some new tricks as well. With the ban list, we've definitely seen that it's got great potential. Crossheart has always been one of those decks that has done well on the back burner. Just people never gave it much attention. They got that Cross 4 hit, and people just kind of like thought, okay, it's dead. There's nothing we can do with it anymore. There's just no way to get that fast power that we had, being able to nuke our opponent in just a few turns by constantly unsuspending and evoing and swinging and unsuspending and doing all that stuff. Now it's got to be a little bit more methodical. Cross 7 isn't like a ridiculous powerfully card. Cross 7 Superior Mode coming out in BT12, a little bit more support for it. Not like a must-have or anything like that, not a pivotal card for the strategy, but nice if you have it. And now that its competition has been kind of neutered a little bit because of the ban list, it's going to be sitting in a really good position. So I think it's definitely up here with Grandis for sure. We might as well go ahead and put it in the top. It did make it to the finals of Nationals for the US format. We've also seen it do exceptionally well in all the others. It made top 16 in every single Nats. So I think there's no reason not to put it up here. It does get a little bit more support in BT12, and it didn't get hit on the ban list. There's literally nothing holding this deck down right now, so there's no reason not to put it up here into the top of A tier. Now, do I think it's an S tier deck? No, I don't. I think there's plenty of other things that can still match it pretty well, depending on the builds that come out. So I think it's super solid. Next, we got Ulforce. Ulforce has been absolutely killing the Ultimate Cups. Now, the thing about Ultimate Cups is it's still a limited format. In a full format, Ulforce is definitely still going to have its problems, its problematic matchups, things like that. Is the second you start working in multiple colors into the format again, it's gonna struggle a little bit. But that doesn't mean it's not good. Okay, it's got the evade, it's got blocker on its big tentpole pieces. It can attack a bajillion times in one turn as long as they keep pulling the Renas out. It's crazy. Okay, it's absolutely crazy of a deck. I think it's 100% an A tier deck. Depending on what it goes against, it will not like security control. Okay, it's still gonna hard lose probably to security control. Well, I would say hard lose. It's got a rough matchup against security control. It sure gets tons of hits, but they're still checking those security, and that's the thing that's like these other newer decks are going to excel at, is that they're not checking the security, so they can dodge the security control matchup, whereas this deck will still suffer in the security control matchup, but it's going to do extremely well in a lot of these other matchups, as just as a caveat to that. So yeah, I think Ulforce is still a very strong deck, definitely worthy contender here. Next, we got the Galactamon, Venmon deck, Venmon, however you want to say it. This is an awkward one. I've seen this deck just do incredible things. But again, it takes a little bit of time to build up. So unlike Ulforce, where we're getting tons of hits in and things like that, and just getting a lot of checks, Venmon takes some time to assemble, okay? And it's still going to also have a little bit of an issue in like a security control matchup, or some of these other ones, up here in rogue tier. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of rogue tier. I think that's a pretty comfortable position to put it in. I don't think there's any harm in that. I've seen it I've seen it destroy some of these decks up here in the A category, but I haven't seen it in a setting where it's playing in a full, open meta. So in a full open meta, I think it's still going to suffer. It's going to struggle against a lot of these decks, but then also it's going to be able to capitalize on some of these decks as well. Just to kind of depends. Moving on from there, we've got, this is the Mervamon deck. I also have Minerva in here as a separate deck, so kind of keep that in mind, which we will get to in just a second. This is going to be, it also got the new Mervamon as well that's going to support it from BT12. This is using a lot of your Digicross and save mechanics in it. It's very quick, so it's kind of a rush style deck where you're going to get lots of bodies and they're just going to be swinging like crazy. It's got some nice control elements to it. It is very combo intensive, so you got to be really mindful of where you're at on that. But it can also struggle. Too many blockers or things like that. Blocker evade is going to be a big problem for it. I think it'll probably sit. I don't want to put it above Examon because I think it's going to probably sit just below Examon. That feels pretty solid there. It's going to lose against other faster decks, more consistent decks, things like that. This at least doesn't rely entirely on needing to be consistent. It can do its whole thing with numerous different lines of play, which is really good for any deck that can get away with that. That's really great. But I don't think it can really compete with a lot of these A-tier decks. I think a lot of these A-tier decks kind of blow it out of the water a little bit. So it is what it is. Now we also have Minerva, which is, this is like your more traditional loop deck, right? This is your Minerva loop, using like the Cerberusmon, the werewolf modes, and the option card that I'm forgetting the name of. You're doing that sort of thing. So it's still kind of that OTK style. Or not really OTK, but you know what I mean. It's a very aggressive, can play out a lot of bodies. I think it is better than the Mervamon, but it's high roll, okay? And it's a little bit, where Merva, you don't need the straight combo pieces. You have to have this perfect stack. Whereas the Minerva, you kind of do need a little bit, a setup, things like that. Got to have that trash setup. Your opponent has to play into it a little bit there, and allow you to basically combo off. And if they do, then if you let them, then they're going to crush you, but you can play around it a little bit. So it's very high roll, and if it does get its high roll, then it can do exceptionally well. But I've also seen this deck, even when it full combo pops off, it still only gets like maybe 3 or 4 checks in, and then it's just like, it just runs out of steam. And then it can't do anything else. So like it's really awkward to where to put this. I think it's probably somewhere down here into low rogue tier. Full combo, and it still can't like finish off the opponent, right? And I think that's the biggest issue. In certain matchups, it just can't do anything at all. If it's Cerberus, if it's werewolf modes, like swing into security and they die before you can go into another Mervamon, you have to deal with that as well. You really want to swing with those rush targets, and if they rush and die, then what do you do? Any big blocker decks are going to just absolutely crush it. So like, Ulforce having its blockers there, GSmon having blocker available there, Bloom having the Cherrymon being able to redirect into your big bodies, that's going to suffer. There's numerous different things that it's going to lose against. So I think it's going to sit down here into rogue tier a little bit. And yeah, it's a little unfortunate. It's a very cool deck. It's very unique. But in the right hands, like I said, rogue tier in the right hands can do exceptionally well. Next, we got Baghra. Baghra getting new support in BT12, but I think the support is really kind of geared towards Dark Knightmon more than it is the Baghra. And Baghra just, man, it's rough. If you don't see your tamers early to save underneath, ouch. It does get a new tamer that it can potentially use, but not as well as the tamer that it has right now. The tamer it has right now is exceptionally good for the deck. The new one is okay. It's got potential there. I think I'm actually going to put Baghra down here into B tier, though. It can be a little bit bricky, and if you don't see your pieces, ASAP, you're going to start wasting resources, and you do not want to waste resources in this deck. I think Bogger himself is a really cool Digimon that can be teched into a lot of things, but like a full focus Boggermon deck, yeah, I think it's going to have to sit somewhere into B tier, unfortunately, and that'll be our first B tier deck. Very unfortunate. Next, we got Mirei here. This is going to represent our Mastemon decks, even if you're not using Mirei in your Mastemon decks. I love this alt art. I think it's fantastic, so I'm going to use it to represent our Mastemon. And where do we put Mastemon right now? I think it's honestly going to be like low rogue tier, maybe B tier now. This deck just hasn't really done much of anything in the current format. And next format in BT12, again, we're going to go against all these decks that are going to be trashing security. So you can't rely on your security anymore to get stuff off. You can't get your security Digimon to play and get the benefits with your Mastemon getting to pop stuff. You can't rely on like Chaos Degradation and security anymore. Flame Hellscythe and security. No, nothing like that is going to work because they're just going to trash it all for free. Without actually checking it. And then tons of body clearing abilities as well. So I think Mastay is definitely going to struggle. It's already struggled against a lot of these decks. Some of these quicker ones it can do okay against, like Grandis. It has a good matchup against Grandis. Ulforce potentially, depending on the route you go. It can't really worry, but Chaos Degradation still crushes it, but everything else it's kind of awkward against. But then all these other ones, it has no issues with. So I think it's going to fall way down, maybe bottom of row tier. It might even be somewhere in B tier. I don't think it quite falls in B tier yet. It's still decent, but I think I'm going to put it at the bottom of row tier, which is really unfortunate because I really enjoyed playing this in BT11. But good God, did I brick every time I played that deck? Ugh, so rough. Next, we got Red Hybrid making a comeback, getting just a plethora of new support. Really strong, got tons of power to it. I definitely want to put it here in A tier. This might be a little bit of copium, not gonna lie, might be just a little bit. This is the deck that I want to play like the most for like locals and things like that. I think it's good enough to win locals out. I don't know how it will perform necessarily in a meta environment. We have seen it do exceptionally well in the JP format, but that doesn't really always add up to the English format. So it could definitely fall off a little bit there in our format. So we'll just have to wait and see where it kind of falls. It's fantastic. It's got, and just, you literally have your whole deck now. It's like all these Takuyas and things like that. It's got tons of rookies that it can work with, hybrid rookies. It's got another Mega that's fantastic for the deck. It still has the old Mega as well with that Blitz, a great game finisher. You can also work in the Blitz Omnimon. So it's got two fantastic finishers now for the deck. That can just be super aggro for you, and I think that'll do it really well. It can suffer a bit against like security control, but again, security control is probably gonna be played a lot less now because some of these other decks, so it can really thrive. So it's gonna be kind of similar to these other kind of OTK-ish decks that normally would struggle against security control, but because these other top end decks can put security control in its place, that'll give these guys a better footing to do well. Next, we got new Imperial Dramon, just basically a whole new way to play the deck, just a ton of new support. So it's got a whole new blue Evo chain as well as a whole new green Evo line as well. So it's got tons and tons of support that you can do with it. It's definitely interesting. I don't think it's going to hit quite as hard though, as like these other bigger rush decks that we've got up here. It'll probably sit somewhere along the lines of Minerva, where, if you see your pieces and you can combo off, you can get some good damage in, but it's not like game finishing damage, right? And I think that's the biggest point to make here. It can't quite get that solid amount of hits in to like really finish the game and win it for you. If you do your whole thing and then it sits on the field, and if your opponent blows it up or chaos degradation, you just kind of lose out, and it's a big struggle after that. But still solid. I think it'll be a great fun deck to play. And definitely somewhere in the road tier. I don't think it's quite B tier level. Next, we got Shine Greymon. And oh my goodness, Shine Greymon, absolutely disgusting. In the future, I have tried and tried to make this deck work, and it is not coming together. At least for me. I can't get it to come together for me. Maybe someone else will have better luck with it. It gets 2 more sets of support after this in a row, and that's going to bring it up a lot. So I think right now for BT12 specifically, I think it's going to sit in B tier. Just because it's not going to be super efficient. It's losing Greymon X because of the limit list, and that was fantastic because you could go 2 Evo cost with your level 5s, normally a 4, 2 Evo cost on top of that Greymon X, really strong. You know, you can still use Deltamon as well, but because it was a Greymon deck, you know, you could Evo it on top of other Greymons, like your Security Attack +1s and things like that. But now it's not going to have that toolbox available to it anymore, so it's going to have to go a little bit more rigid, and then once it gets more support out, it's going to get fantastic. It's missing burst mode and ruin mode. I think once it gets burst mode and ruin mode, it'll be just absolutely incredible. The Marcus it's getting is great because you can do some really great things with Marcus. Play Marcus up for 1, and then you're going to be able to Evo for free into your next Evo line for it. So I think that's going to keep it really, really strong. But besides that, I mean, literally, you're relying on this Marcus to do tons of damage. It's going to be, you know, a 3,000, 6,000 DP Digimon. Like, that's only going to do so much, right? You know, go and get some of these other decks with these big blockers. There's not going to be much it can do about that. It's going to have some DP reduction going on a little bit, okay, depending on, you know, where you're at on your combo and things like that and how many bodies you got on field. It can be a little bit slow. It's going to be playing out some Marcuses for free, but if you don't see those Marcuses, you're going to struggle. I mean, I've literally bricked on this deck so many times. It's so rough. I think with each set, it's going to climb higher though. With the next release, I think we get EX4 next. It'll climb up to Rogue tier, and then when we get BT13, it'll climb into A tier. And that's just my prediction of where this deck's going to go. With each round of support, it's going to get better and better. Quartzmon. Quartzmon itself is an insanely powerful card, just absolutely disgusting, can do so much with it. But I think Quartzmon as a whole, as a deck, is not all that hot. It takes a long time to set up and can be really costly. The level 5 that you warp with into him, you know, like getting all that set up, you know, you got to get your tamers and then activate your tamers to get it lots of inheritables, so that way it can then warp into Quartzmon, things like that. Like, it takes a lot of time to set up, and then once you get it out there, your opponent literally just plays an option card to blow it up, and then you're just back to where you were. You know, you're back to square one with it and have to build up again. I think it's a strong card itself, but the pure Quartzmon decks I don't think are that great, which is probably why we've never seen this deck do exceptionally well in like the JP format, because JP formats really like to they like to stick with what it's intended to play for. They don't really like to go outside the box and like make super extravagant, crazy, wonky decks. Like, let me throw in this one random card into this other deck that normally you wouldn't think would ever go in there. Like people putting Bogremon in security control. Like, what? And then do really well with it. Like the one at the US Nats. Crazy, okay? And then, but in a pure Bogremon deck, you know, it's not really that great. And I think Quartzmon is the same exact situation. Fantastic boss monster, super strong card, but the pure deck that it goes in, it's not too great. It's a little bit slow, but I think in other decks, it can do really well. I'm working on a security control deck with it teched in there, and I think that's really, really strong there. But on its own, I don't think it's too hot. Moving on, I know this is a super long video, but I wanted to give you a good breakdown of everything. Next, we got the War Greymon, the new War Greymon, right, with the new support that it's getting, and you can also work in War Greymon X into this build. So this is like a new War Greymon X, but I wanted to use the new War Greymon art because it's like basically the new War Greymon that you're going to use. If it uses Raid, it can unsuspend and attack again. It's going to have Piercing now, so if you get multiple security checks with Piercing and multiple attacks, yeah, that's going to be super strong. I think it's going to be a great deck. It's a little bit, you know, I wouldn't want to quite say bricky because it's going to have so much support that it can use, you know, especially if you're running the X antibody deck. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see where that falls. But I think it's definitely a solid deck here. It's going to have some good protection. You still got the Greymon X's. You've got the Altarius modes for protection as well. You know, we honestly might as well put it up here. If you're going to classify it as a War Greymon / War Greymon X deck, I think 100% can fit in A tier, no problem. I'm sure people are tired of seeing the War Greymon stuff up here, but I mean, honestly, War Greymon hasn't been too hot for, you know, very long. It's been pretty recent that it's finally been actually, like, War Greymon itself has been solid. So I'm happy to see it up here. Kind of going right off the cuff of that, let's go ahead and look at Gaiomon. This is going to be your Black War Greymon decks, your Gaiomon decks, which have really turned into, like, a turbo like Gaiomon deck, and they're basically still sitting the same. They lost one card in the Greymon X that's going to reduce the Evo cost, the reduce to the Evo cost. It still has Deltamon to do the same thing. It's going to have, you know, other Greymon X's for protection. It's still got tons of toolbox stuff. The thing that hurts it is if you're still trying to do the 4 Evo cost, you're going to suffer. But if you're going to use the 3 Evo cost Greymon X's and you're going to use those new ties, I think that's what a lot of people are forgetting, is that you're going to have the new Greymon that plays out the tie for free. And the new tie reduces the Evo cost of things as well. So you're still going to be able to go into your level 5s for incredible efficiency with the new support from BT12. In BT11, sure, losing that reduced Evo sucks. In BT12, you've got new ways to play around that, not a big deal. So I think these decks are still going to do just as well as they've been doing. But you know, a little bit less efficient. You've got to kind of play around a little bit more now. I think it's still a fantastic deck. I'm just going to put it somewhere up in here. I don't want to quite put it at the top. I don't want to give it that. Gaiomon is my favorite Digimon, like ever. Like even long before this deck became a thing. Like as soon as they did this initial Gaiomon reveal, I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. It's Black War Greymon in Samurai armor. That is super dope. I love it. Like literally. My one of my memory markers that I had custom made by my wife is the Gaiomon helmet here, which I think is super cool. Really like using it when I can. It's a cool deck. Gaiomon is still a solid deck, I think. It's still got great damage. It's got great survivability. It's got great control. If you want to attack your opponents unsuspended, you can de-digivolve things, all kinds of great stuff. I use the black version in the Ultimate Cup and literally full cleared my opponent's security, and they were mind blown. Using a black base, because you use the Sunoriza, you use the Metal Greymon that gives security tank +1 to your reboot targets, and then use the Metal Greymon that when you reboot, it trashes another security. So you go Gaiomon, swing for 4 checks, reboot, trash the last one, and what do you do? Assuming you had like a Blitz Omnimon or something like that, you know, potentially you could go for game on the following turn, clear out a body, clear out a blocker. You know, they struggled to deal with it. And that was, you know, in a very limited format. You could still do OTK stuff with this guy. It's still good. It's still a good deck. There's not much else to say about it. So moving on, though, we got the new Arestrodramon deck. This thing is really cool. You're basically a Crossheart deck with new support. This is the Hunter's deck, as some people call it. I think this is definitely an A-tier deck because you're just as good as all these other save Crossheart decks, Digicross decks, but you're just doing it a different way. You're reducing Evo costs and things like that. So you can promote up your rookies at a raising area and then Evo up into these guys for free, being super efficient about it, gaining memory, drawing cards. It's got great consistency because of its tamers, great memory control as well. Attacking twice with a Arestrodramon in one turn. No, I'm not putting it in S tier. Yeah, there's not really much to say about this. Until you see it in action, it's one of those that's really hard to explain because it can do so much, just as much as any of these other like Crossheart decks. And I think we're just going to go ahead and throw it up in here into A tier. Yeah, for the Hunter's deck. Really solid. Kind of going right off of that, let's go into Blue Flare here. The same exact thing. We've seen Blue Flare do really well. It can stun like any of these other decks that have to sit on the field for multiple turns. It can really like control them. So like Jessamon and things like that. Where it's going to struggle is any of these decks that can promote up out of raising area, or like the Crossheart decks that can just play themselves out of thin air and get rushed, things like that. That's where this deck is going to fall off at, and I think so right in the middle of A tier. It's good against a lot of these other ones that sit on the field for a turn or two, but it really struggles against these other decks that it can't stun during its own turn, and that's where it's going to struggle the most against. But yeah, I've seen this deck do amazing things. It's got crazy power, people teching in, like the other Greymon that gets security attack +1. You know, you can attack twice with this guy, so you can do a ton of damage really, really quickly out of nowhere, and you can kind of just sit there and wait for it too. And that's what's the really great part is, sometimes your opponent can like prepare for what you're about to do. It's like, oh, you know, they're getting ready in their raising area. I see what's coming. I'm gonna go set up my blocker here so they can't get past me, and I'll be ready for it. With this deck, it's like I can pop off at a moment's notice. You don't know when it's coming, but I can do it out of nowhere. And so it's like, oh, you left me an opening. I'm going to take full advantage of that. I'm going to full combo out of nowhere in one turn, and then get like a ton of security checks on you, stun your board, and good luck surviving the next turn. So that's where I think Blue Flare is going to sit. Still solid. Next, we got Beelzemon X. If you've been following the channel for a couple weeks now, you know where I think this deck is going to fall. This deck is stupid good. JP format, it did really well. And that was with them playing like as the deck is intended. They built it as intended, and it was still absolutely disgusting. And I think it's 100% going to be just as disgusting here, if not better. Trashing all of your deck, right? And then you promote up an Impmon out of raising area. The when attacking, Evo into the starter deck Beelzemon, get some security attack +1 on it, so you're checking 2 security, and then you can use the X antibody option then to Evo into the Beelzemon X here, and trash 3 security, and then you're going to check 2 security. And when you do that whole process, you gain a bunch of memory back, either through the mills or also through like the starter deck Beelzemon gains you memory, so essentially making its Evo cost almost free. And then you can go into this guy as well and get more value, and then you go straight into the blast mode, which is, I call it like a pseudo Blitz Omnimon. It's basically a 1-cost Omnimon, a Blitz Omnimon. So you're going to Evo into it for 1 cost. It's going to unsuspend itself, and then you can attack again. It's not truly a Blitz Omnimon, but it's so efficient in what it does that you can keep it on your turn. It'll unsuspend, and you can swing again for game. So strong. This is like the new OTK deck, and I'm going to put it right here at the top of A tier, because we're very similar to these other decks where we're getting tons of checks in, but we don't actually have to check our opponent's security for most of the checks, and I think that's what's super strong about it. Really, really ridiculous. Not much else to say about it. And if you got any early game checks with your crashes and things like that, then it makes it even easier for it to finish off the opponent. So yeah, Beelzemon X probably will be I think it'll be the best deck of the format. Do I think it's unbeatable or anything like that? No, it takes time to set up. For you to mill 30 cards out of your deck, you're not going to get that on turn 2, right? I just think it's the safest out of all the OTK decks, because it doesn't have to really rely on the opponent doing anything. It gets to just set up itself, set up its trash, get tons of value off of its mill, so you can keep going and doing more combos. So yeah, really, really strong deck. If I was to play a deck at a regional trying to get an invite, this is probably the deck that I'm going with. So if you made it all the way here 45 minutes into this recording, then you see my thoughts on that one. Next, we got the Dark Knightmon here, which has been putting in some work at Ultimate Cup. Really awesome. It's getting the new secret rare support in BT12, which again, it's not like a must-have for the Dark Knight deck or anything like that. I think it's just a really solid deck. It does what it does, what it wants to do, very efficiently. It's kind of like Blue Flare. You know, you can get some really nice like value out of it to like control your opponent really nicely. It can put in some good damage. It just keeps bodies on board. It's hard to like clear them, so any kind of deletion and stuff like that is just going to keep getting, coming back. I don't want to put it in A tier, though. I think I'm going to just throw it down here into really high rogue tier. And I feel pretty solid about that. So I think we're going to put it right up here next to security control in rogue tier. It's like on the cusp of A tier, but just it doesn't quite have the strength to really, I don't know, put it where it needs to be. It can hard lose in some matchups. I mean, a lot of the bodies are like less than 10,000 DP, so it can't quite hang with like a lot of these like big mega decks, and I think that's where it struggles the most. Is it doesn't always have the DP with a lot of its strategies. It's a lot of level 5 and lower shenanigans. Now it does have, you know, some megas that it can use, but not always, and not always what it needs to be using to do a lot of its combo pieces. Moving on, we got Melga here. Melga is still just as good as it's always been. The only thing that's been holding this deck back was Black War Greymon X redirecting it, because you basically have one big stack that's ready to just crush your opponent's security. But then Black War Greymon X or any big blocker decks, they could just stun it. Or just prevent it from not stunning it, but it could prevent it from just comboing off and just getting a ton of checks in. And with, I think, Black War Greymon X really falling off, that Black War Greymon deck being more of a Gaiomon focused deck now, a lot more aggro to it rather than the Black War Greymon X focus of it. As we've seen, that's how the deck is evolved, is now basically a Gaiomon deck with the tech of Black War Greymon X in it for certain matchups. I think with us seeing less of that in play and more of these other decks, 100% Melga is like right back up into the top of A tier, right where it was before, right up here with Grandis. It and Grandis are basically pseudo the same deck. Of course, their playstyles are vastly different, but the overall goal is the same. You're just doing an insane amount of security checks against your opponent, and that's it. They're just doing a ton of security checks and they're just going to win. And that's right where I feel like the format is going to be. It's going to be like these 5 decks here are going to be controlling. You'll see these the most of. I think these will be the ones you see the most of, and a lot of these like top 16s are going to be these decks right here. Moving ahead. And that's really all there is to it. Melga is just as good as it's always been. Well, the competition has been thinned out for it, and now it can shine again. So if you've invested in this and you've got like a super high rarity deck of it, I mean, now's a good time to play it again. Get your use out of that money you spent on it, because it's good. It is good. I'll give you that. And the last one I want to talk about is Armor Rush. Armor Rush has definitely fallen off. Unfortunately, the Digivolve like of Gaiomon and things like that, that's definitely hurt it. It's just kind of in an awkward position. Any sort of like big blocker stuff has always been an issue for it. So like Ulforce and then the Gaiomon, like that Greymon inheritable of giving it blocker, you know, being predominantly played, definitely made it struggle to keep up with the meta. But with, you know, we're going to see some of these decks start falling off a little bit. I think it's going to have a good chance to come back a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be A tier level. I think it's going to be somewhere probably down in here with the like the Merva decks and the Minerva. It can be really fast and aggressive at some points, but in certain matchups, it's just going to hard lose, like Examon forcing it to attack and then like getting deleted immediately. I mean, Churk can Armor Purge, which is good, but then you have to go back into another armor to get your value out of it, hopefully unsuspending, and then having the memory to also use like Fire Rocket to capitalize on that can be a bit of a struggle for it. So yeah, we'll definitely keep it kind of down here a little bit. It's like these other kind of like Dorbic and things like that. It can get some good damage in really fast out of nowhere, but it's never quite on that point where it can finish the job. Not like these other decks up here like Garuru X, Grandis. They can do like a full clear, really, really strong, and then like basically set up, sometimes even finish the game immediately, like Hybrid for Game or Double Mimi for Grandis, Garuru X, just like Blitz Omnimon, you know, whatever. It has so many unsuspends anyway, it can just like get enough attacks in to win, whatever. And that's kind of where these decks are going to just outclass it in every single way. And so that's kind of where we're going to fall for it. I think there is no S tier deck. Like, Beelzemon X is really close. It's really close, but it takes time, and I think that's going to be really important. It also has basically no defense. So besides like a couple option cards that might get hit in security, kind of like a Beelstar deck, you know, it has no protection. And so if your opponent like just rushes you down, you lose. If you just get really good high roll and then get really good hits off your mills, like good memory gain, and you can keep your turn going and going and going, and you can just keep comboing and keep milling and milling and then just go into full combo, then yeah, you'll do great. But against these other decks that are also fast, you don't have an answer for those decks. So that's what keeps this deck out of S tier. Is it's just as good as all these other decks, but kind of the same caveat is it doesn't do anything to obstruct the opponent as much. It just kind of sets up itself to win very quickly. And yeah, so I feel pretty confident with this list. We'll kind of see how it falls when the BT12 regionals start rolling around, which is going to be in May. So we'll get some good answers in May on where we're going to see this at.